I guess you know who I am. I've been in here for the last several weeks. So I'm Jeff Armbruster, member at Mary Queen Catholic Church in Peachtree Corners, Georgia. Middle part of Atlanta. 2 sessions tonight, about 45 minutes each, with intermission in between. So, most of the material that I'll be talking about tonight is excerpt from a new book that I published, Disgrace about Thanksgiving. And it's called Disgrace of His Mercy. The subtitle is Reflections on the Gift and Duty of Mercy. So basically the first session tonight will be all about the many ways we receive the grace and gifts of grace and mercy from God. The second half will be about our obligation to share those gifts that we have received with those around us. So, after that meal, I'm going to have to be loud and kind of swinging my arms and hopes to keep everybody awake until they die of a food coma. We're going to start tonight with 2 stories. The first one is about Robertson and Rachel. They were a lovely couple. They married about 35 years. They married about at the age of 25 after they got out of school and got themselves established. Robertson is the president of a small university in the southeastern United States. In addition to being a mother of 3, Rachel was also a very successful businesswoman and took an early retirement when given the opportunity to do so because she was inspired to go out and do inspirational, motivational speaking. Well, Rachel was out doing one of those talks one evening, and a young friend of hers came up to her at the end of the day, or at the end of the talk, and said, "Rachel, the presentation tonight was just simply wonderful. But I'm curious, why did you tell the same story again, exactly the same 2 times?" Rachel had a bit of a chill that went through her. She had no clue that she had told the story twice. And so she was very gracious to this young friend and said, "Well, thank you for the compliment," and then did a little bit of arm waving and kind of trying to smooth over what to her was kind of a significant emotional event. When she got home, she told Robertson about what happened because he wanted to know how the presentation had gone. And after a great deal of conversation, the 2 of them realized that they needed to maybe get some medical attention for her. Something wasn't right. So starting the next day, they started having a series of doctor's appointments. And after a couple of months and a battery of tests, it was determined that Rachel was suffering from advancing dementia. Had no previous evidence of it. And so, over the next couple of months after the diagnosis, Robertson was beginning to realize this was kind of really bad. So he went to the board of directors of the university where he was president and said, "Folks, my wife needs my attention. I'm going to have to resign." They said, "Robertson, you can't do that. So we're in this big growth program. We need you here. The board loves you, the faculty loves you, the students love you. We need you here." He said, "I'm sorry, I have to go take care." He said, I need to take care of my wife." And he said, "Tell you what, we're going to increase your salary enough to cover 24/7 coverage for Rachel so that you don't have to worry about taking care of your wife." He says, "You missed the point. This is not about having to take care of Rachel. This is what I'm choosing to do." He said, "Well, why don't we just hang on a little bit and see what might be coming of all of this. We know that you've got this, we know you've got this presentation to make in Chicago representing the university. Let's just see how things go, and we'll even pay for Rachel to go with you on that trip so you don't have to worry about her." And so they did. The day came for traveling. They got on their airplane, took their little commuter flight into Atlanta. And for those of you that have flown in and out of Atlanta, you know that our concourses
are about 12 miles long each. Actually, they're only a half a mile, quarter of a mile each way from the center. So they got to the gate, and they had a 2.5-hour layover waiting for their plane to Chicago. They had been sitting no more than about 2 minutes. Rachel bolts up out of her chair, walks over to the concourse, goes walking at a high rate of speed to the far end of the concourse, turns around, walks all the way past the gate to the other end, back, come down, sits down in her chair. She doesn't say a word. Robertson's obviously a little bit concerned about that. But he didn't say anything. He didn't want to cause any disturbance just yet. We were just getting started. Exactly 2 minutes later, Rachel gets up. She gets out onto the concourse. She goes marching down to the end of the concourse. She turns around. She comes all the way back again. Sits down. The next time, Robertson's decide he's going to walk with her. Exactly 2 minutes later, she gets up, goes boom, boom, boom. This went on for 2.5 hours while they waited for their plane. About time for the plane to be loaded, and there were 2 young professional women standing over near the gate agent's desk, very professionally dressed. And one looks to the other and says, I wonder if I will ever find a man who would love me that much. There is someone who loves us that much and infinitely more. I'd like for you to just think about being on that hill called Golgotha on Friday morning of what we call Good Friday. They have already nailed one of Jesus's hands to the cross, and you've managed to work your way into the edge of the crowd, and you're close enough that you can actually ask him a question. He can hear you. And just as they are about to grab and pull his hand to nail the second hand down, you say to him, Jesus, how much do you love me? With all of his strength, he reaches as far as he can. He says, I love you this much. The Father, or the love of God the Father for the Son is perfect in every way. It's unconditional, it's all-consuming, and it's totally selfless. Jesus receives all the love he needs from the Father, but the Father's love can't be contained, and so it spills out from him to us. If we're going to be like Jesus, we will let all of that extra love that comes from him to us spill over to those around us. That's what it means to exercise the gift of grace and mercy to those around us. We know about what it means to receive God's grace and mercy. This is what it means then to have the power to go out and share that with others around us. The love we receive from Jesus cannot be contained either, so his love must overflow from us to others. I'd like for you to lock in on that statement and hold on to it for at least the next 30 or 40 minutes. Never doubt this. God loves you unconditionally. Unconditionally. He proves it by showering us with grace and mercy. Truth be told, he actually showers us with ridiculous amounts of grace and scandalous levels of mercy. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit and understand kind of where that's coming from, where I'm coming from with that. So Father already talked to you about the Catechism of the United States. It's right over here, Catechism of the Catholic Church. That's what the Catechism says about grace. It's the free and undeserved help that God gives to us to respond to his call. So it's the help that he provides us to help us do what he's created us to do. Now, the last time I was here, I talked a lot about St. John Henry Newman's prayer, The Mission of My Life. It actually applies here. The first 3 sentences of that prayer says, God has created me to do him some definite service. He's committed some work to me that he has not committed to another. I have my mission. God never asks us to do anything that he does not equip us to do. So if we've been given a mission, just know that his grace is being given in sufficient quantities for us to do it successfully. Why would Almighty God unconditionally shower us with his grace, however, knowing that we are sinners? Actually, let me say that a little bit differently. Why would Almighty God, while doing so, this is what I wanted to do next, sorry. Why would Almighty God unconditionally shower us with his grace, knowing that we are infected with moral leprosy? I heard that term just last Sunday, and I thought, boy, isn't that spot on? We all know what leprosy is. It's the thing that just eats away at our flesh. Moral leprosy is that kind of thing that causes our sinfulness. Why would God do that? It's simply ridiculous. All right, so you think you know what ridiculous means. If you were to take an old Webster dictionary and look up the word ridiculous, what you'd find is the definitions on the first column: absurd, silly, unreasonable, and preposterous. If you're looking at what's going on in today's lexicon and the way words are used today, even modern versions of the Webster's dictionary, you're going to see that ridiculous also means awesome, excessive, and extravagant. I would maintain to you that all of those are actually apt descriptors, and each can fit into the blank space in this equation, this sentence. The very notion of God's grace being given without condition is fill in the blank with any of those 7 words, and it actually works. So when I first introduced the idea of ridiculous amounts of grace to my wife and some of our friends in Atlanta, they thought I was over the edge. But when I started doing the research, I'm thinking all those words fit perfectly when you think about the wonder of God's grace. All right, so what is mercy? One of the best definitions that I have found so far, I actually read during the extraordinary Jubilee Year of Mercy that Pope Francis had for I think it was 2015 or 16. I think it's 16. Bishop Robert Barron defined mercy as God's love turned towards us, the sinners. It's God's grace turned towards the sinners, God's love. The very first place, it's actually the third place in the Old Testament where the concept of mercy is actually mentioned is in Deuteronomy chapter 7. Know then that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant mercy to the 1,000th generation towards those who love him and keep his commandments. Now, almost certainly, the writer of Deuteronomy didn't actually mean 1,000 generations. But even if he did, that's typically taken as 25 years, so for 25,000 years. In the history of humankind, recorded human history, we're really only so far kind of a small time down payment on that 25,000 years. In truth, the author of Deuteronomy probably meant always. But the very idea of God's mercy being showered onto us throughout eternity is nothing but scandalous. So we're going to go through the same exercise with the word scandal that we did with ridiculous. Scandalous has, these are the first 5 definitions: disgusting, distasteful, and offensive. I think we would all agree those are reasonably negative connotation words, right? But then the 4th definition says beyond boundaries, and kind of out of bounds, so to speak. But the last one, shocking. I've actually done this with all the words, so the shocking definition there is the one that struck the chord. because shocking means startling, astonishing, amazing, unexpected, extraordinary, and remarkable. If I were to put up the same sentence with the fill in the blank, all 6 of those words fit the sentence relative to mercy and it being scandalous. So if we took all 6 of those words, startling and astonishing, how we are shown grace and mercy. Amazing, how we are responsible for Christ's suffering and death, and yet he showers us with his unconditional love. How unexpected he would die for us sinners. Such remarkable gifts showered onto unworthy recipients could not be judged in any other way except extraordinary. It's kind of interesting, when Pope Francis first came out with the announcement about the extraordinary Jubilee year of mercy. I don't know how much you folks read, but there were Catholic pundits all over the world that were just blasting away at him. All this Pope's trying to do is to make sure that people that are guilty of sinfulness get off scot-free. He said, what is with this guy? Trust me, I've read at least 4 or 5 articles where the author actually was making that point. Here's what Francis actually said. Preaching mercy is not the same as ignoring sin or withholding correction. Instead, mercy invites repentance and conversion and ensures the sinner that once God has forgiven us the sin, he forgets it, just as God's mercy is God's justice is his mercy. People still read that and thought he was allowing sinners to get away scot-free. Would you like to know what Jesus says? And he actually said this to St. Faustina in one of the apparitions that he had with her. What Jesus said is, I cannot punish even the greatest sinner if he makes an appeal to my compassion. But on the contrary, I justify him in my unfathomable and inscrutable mercy. I forgive him. All he has to do is ask for forgiveness. Does that sound like God's letting sinners off scot-free? My conclusion after doing all those word studies is God's mercy is truly scandalous, but only through the prism of faith can we understand God's unconditional love and generosity. Only through the prism of faith, because if you're not faithful, none of this makes any sense anyway. The fact of the matter is, we were chosen as his people. He said, I am your God. And all I conclude from this is, what a remarkable love story. And that's what his gifts of grace and mercy to us are all about. It's the love story describing what he does for us, expecting that we will do the same for others. We are in this period of Lent. We're roughly halfway through. It's a period of preparation for Easter, for the celebration of Easter. It's a time for us to be more attentive to and listen to others like Christ listens. It's a time for caring for others more like Christ cares for them, and to pray like Christ did and to love like Christ. But I'd like to concentrate on the last one here. It's also about being present to others like Christ. I found some rather remarkable images on the internet over in the war-torn part of Ukraine. Now, I want you to study these pictures. The one in the bottom right is people crowding on the stairways, just being out of the fray, down underground, trying to keep themselves safe. I don't know if you're aware, but there were priests, deacons, nuns, all kinds of good faith people working around those crowds, just trying to bolster their hope. The picture in the upper left, by contrast, it was a case of, on Sundays, a priest came down into the tunnels and actually offered Mass. You can't necessarily see it on the image that shows on the wall, but if you take on a computer and blow it up, you can actually see the people sounding the words of prayers. They have their mouths open in song. The religious leaders in the area of Kiev and some of the other cities were down in the tunnels ministering to their flocks. Probably never seen any of them, but they were the flocks, giving them hope. Lent is about giving, not getting. And so the whole notion of what we do in Lent to prepare for Easter, just remember it's about giving, not getting. There are numerous stories in the New and Old Testament, particularly the New Testament, stories that describe how Jesus taught his apostles about mercy and grace and forgiveness. One of those stories is taken, and in St. Luke's Gospel it happens, there seems to be more stories about grace and mercy in Luke's Gospel than any of the others. There are some in Luke's Gospel that aren't even in any of the other synoptic Gospels. But this one out of chapter 18 of Luke's Gospel is the story that Jesus tells about the Pharisee and the tax collector that go into the temple. You remember the story, right? What does the Pharisee do? He's standing in the middle of the open, saying out loud how wonderful he is, how many hours he spends in prayer every day, how much he gives to the temple, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he also added, and God, thank you for not letting me be like that tax collector over there in the corner. The tax collector over there in the corner, though, he's got his face buried into his hands. Do you remember what he said? Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner. If you take nothing from the first session of this talk tonight, take away that statement. Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner. There's another story which just happened to be part of today's gospel, and that's the story of the prodigal son, chapter 15 of Luke. I love this story. Father did a beautiful job of describing many of the important points, and I'm not going to really duplicate what he talked about because you already heard what he said. But there's one part of the long gospel that Deacon John read tonight that I'd like to concentrate on because it's a call to action for us. And that's the part where, while he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son and embraced him and kissed him. Do you remember hearing that? He saw him from way off. He ran to him and was filled with compassion. Well, as it turns out, in the Hebrew translation of this very passage, the word compassion is translated into the Hebrew word rachamim, which basically, literally translated, means a form of mother love, the kind of love that you can have anxiety and joyfulness all in the same breath. You don't have to be a mom, or don't have to be a woman to be able to feel that notion of rachamim. But there's the part that I wanted to get across in bringing this particular passage up with respect to grace and mercy is the fact that, as hard as it may be to believe, we often reject God's compassion. We reject God's rachamim. You might ask, well, why do we do that? Or how do we do it? First of all, we do it, primary way is by our reluctance to fully confess our sins in confession. It's just holding back. It's also we also refuse it when we refuse to accept God's compassionate forgiveness for the sins that we do confess. Why would we do that? Here are a few reasons that I could think of. We don't fully confess because of fear, arrogance, self-righteousness, too proud to admit our wrongdoings, guilty as charged, rationalize that what we did wasn't really sinful, or maybe what I did was so bad God couldn't possibly forgive me. yet he forgave his persecutors. Did we do anything that bad? I don't think so. Instead, what we probably want to consider doing is humble ourselves before God, tell the whole truth, and humbly accept the wonderful mercy and forgiveness that he offers. That's what our sacrament of reconciliation is about. But we have to be willing to put ourselves into the right state of heart. So are you willing to accept the mercy and forgiveness and thank God for his gifts? Or are you going to hold back and keep God at arm's length? I'm not sure there's necessarily an all or nothing kind of answer, because I'm guessing at some point in time we're each maybe a little bit guilty of holding God off at arm's length, not allowing him to fully embrace us. Give thanks to the Lord for his good. His mercy endures forever. Just burn that into your brain. Give thanks to the Lord for his good. His mercy endures forever. In chapter 22 of St. Luke's Gospel, there are two stories that St. Luke tells that has a remarkably odd parallelism. One is the story of Peter's denial of Christ, and the second is Judas's betrayal. Both those guys committed horrible sins, right? One denied him, one betrayed him. Both of them actually asked for forgiveness. But the outcomes were radically different, weren't they? As it turns out, when Jesus was being led from the room where he had been questioned by Caiaphas, he happened to pass the portal to see out into the garden where Peter was hiding, pretty much, hiding in space. And according to Cardinal Raniero Cantalamessa, who is the preacher to the papal household for about the last 40 years, by the way, he went from father to cardinal in one step. Anyway, he says, and the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Father Cantalamessa maintains that message, the merciful glance that he gave to Peter, was an even louder message than the rooster crowing 3 times. And that's what actually got Peter's attention to realize what he had done. Judas went off and hanged himself. Peter became the rock that Christ built his church on. There's also a wonderful story that's familiar to everybody too in the 8th chapter of St. John's Gospel, where the Pharisees have brought this woman, they said they caught in adultery, and said, they brought her to Jesus and said, okay, we just caught this woman in adultery. You know what the law says. It says we have to stone her to death. What do you say? Jesus said, the person without sin cast the first stone, right? Then he knelt down and he started writing in the sand, right? St. Jerome actually maintains that he was probably writing the names of the Pharisees in the dirt. Nobody can actually prove that, but that's speculation. But all of a sudden, that little gathering that was very loud and boisterous out in the public square, after Jesus said the person without sin cast the first stone, all of a sudden they were kind of moonwalking their way back out of the square, weren't they? It got progressively quieter quickly. And at some point, Jesus realized that it was just he himself and this woman there alone. And he says to her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She replied, no, sir. No one has. Then Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore. He did not berate her. He did not condemn her. He said, go and sin no more. His mercy was poured out in abundance on that woman in that public square. In John chapter 4 is the story of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. This is a wonderful story. It's long and but there's just so many levels and intricacies of it. But you know that she was a Samaritan. She was a strange woman. She was not accompanied by anyone, and Jesus started talking to her. He broke about 3 or 4 social order rules when he did that. And then he said, I'd like a drink of water, and so she decided she would help him. And they had some conversation, and Jesus realized that, or she admitted to Jesus that she was in some irregular relationships. But then Jesus ultimately said to her, everyone who drinks the water from this well will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks from the well I shall give will never thirst. What he was talking about was drinking from the well that never runs dry. There's a beautiful contemporary Christian song that's part of the refrain. Drink from the well that never runs dry. All I want to do is be in your presence and drink from the well that never runs dry. We are also gifted with God's grace and mercy through the communion of saints. There are patron saints for just about any region, any cause, any ailment. One of my favorites in recent time is St. Peregrine. Do you all know who St. Peregrine is? Anybody that's had or been around the ailment called cancer? He's your guy. St. Peregrine is one of those wonderful saints that has given comfort to so many people in his life and has been responsible for cures of cancer for many of those who invoked his involvement. The communion of saints that we profess every time we say the creed, we need to be reaching out more to those folks, particularly in our current times of need. St. John Henry Cardinal Newman, back in the mid-19th century, described Jesus as, he is infinite mercy. He then says that Mary, she is the mother of mercy. There's some beautiful comparisons that he makes between connections between Jesus and Mary in that piece that he wrote back in, I think it was 1848, Discourses to a Mixed Congregation, I think is the name of the article. But the connection here, I hope, is obvious. Jesus is the source of mercy. Mary is the mother of mercy. She has been crowned Queen of Heaven and Earth. We profess that every time we pray the Rosary and say the glorious mysteries, the final one of which is Coronation of Mary, Queen of Heaven and Earth. It's particularly important for me because my wife and I attend Mary, our Queen Catholic Church. So she is our saint. She's been crowned Queen of Heaven and Earth. But then along with the stuff that was in the previous slide, Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy. And you all recognize that as the first 2 phrases in the last prayer that we say as part of the Rosary, right? Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy. That's actually the last prayer that I prayed with my mom before she died. So the prayer to me takes on special significance. Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy. Mary has appeared, she intercedes for us in a wide range of ways. But we all know, and there's been actually a lot of conversation about this recently with the dedication of Russia and Ukraine to the Sacred Heart of Mary yesterday on the 25th Feast of the Annunciation. But Mary has appeared to many people, oftentimes very innocent people like children, over time. Just a little over 100 years ago, actually in 1917, she appeared through a series of apparitions to 3 shepherd children in Fatima, Portugal. She actually gave them 5 different prayers. I was totally unaware of 4 of those until I did the research here. But the one prayer that is called the Fatima Prayer, you all recognize that, right? It's the one that we say at the end of every decade of a rosary. Oh, my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of our mercy. Here comes the mercy thing again. I'd like for you to take particular attention to the last phrase, especially those in most need of thy mercy. So what does that actually mean? We're actually begging God to have mercy not just on loved ones and friends, but bullies, hardened criminals, tourists, criminals, despots, the neighbor who's a pain in our neck, and Vladimir Putin as well. Can you think of anyone else in the world that might need more mercy at this moment in time? The next time you say that prayer, I'd like for you to consciously think about praying for God's mercy for that guy. I have to tell you, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. But that's what Mary was actually asking those children to convey to the church. People most in need of your mercy. But the single largest legacy that Christ left us to prove his love and mercy is the gift of the Holy Eucharist. What was the responsorial psalm at today's Mass? Come on, somebody can get it. Taste and see. It's exactly what it's talking about, is the gift of God's mercy. I like to think of the Holy Eucharist as the bread of mercy. It is that spiritual food that gives us the strength and the stamina, just like regular bread that we would eat for a meal gives us physical strength. This particular bread gives us spiritual strength. There's a priest by the name of Father Joseph Langford. Have you ever heard that name before? Father Langford, along with a little 4'9" lady over in Calcutta, India, I think her name was Saint Mother Teresa. They co-founded the order of priests that was associated with the missionaries of charity nuns of Mother Teresa's fame. Here's what Father Langford said. We are to become living extensions of Christ. His life is to take flesh in us. Just as the lowly elements of bread and wine contain the magnitude of God's love, so too the humble conditions of our lives can become a liturgy of praise, adoration, and service. If we were to ask, where today is Jesus' smile, his words, his hands, his compassion, his voice, and his face? The answer is, he lives in our charity. This means that our lives must be in harmony with the Eucharist. We too shall be broken for others and poured out, but it is Christ who is broken and poured out in us. We become the bread of mercy and intercession for others. We who have received healing become vehicles of healing. I have to tell you, it was a rather remarkable epiphany that I had when I read that the first time. We are to become the bread of mercy to those around us. Never in the world had I ever thought of such a thing. I don't know if you're aware, but the second Sunday of Lent, every year, even all 3 cycles of the readings, we celebrate the Feast of Transfiguration. Huh? Good. All right, so Transfiguration is all about transforming, right? I like for you to think about this notion of transforming, especially in light of the statement that Father Langford had about the bread of mercy. What good is it if bread and wine change, but we don't? What good is it if the bread and wine are changed into the body and blood of Christ, if we don't change when we receive it. The words of the consecration say, "This is my body, given for you." This is my body given for you. I'm going to tell you a little story, and then we're going to take a break. About 55 years ago in St. Louis, Missouri, there was a young African-American boy by the name of Maurice Nutt. Maurice's dad had just died of cancer, and his mom had just given birth to his third sibling. So her name was Beatrice, B for short. So B found herself a single mom of 4 children, the oldest of which was 6. Now, a couple years later, she obviously had a pretty tough row to hoe, right? She kept her crew pretty well contained, but as Maurice got a couple years older, he started running around with a bunch of boys in his neighborhood. And they weren't necessarily being raised by parents who were as attentive to their raising as B was to him. And so one day this group of boys, 6 or 8 of them, happened to see this homeless woman digging around in a trash can. And they started saying, almost in unison, "Dirty, stinky, smelly Sally, what are you doing in that trash can?" And they just taunted her over and over again. After a while, they'd get tired and they'd leave her alone and go on. But the next time they saw him, it was the same thing repeated over and over again. One Saturday morning, late morning, Maurice was looking out the window of his bedroom window in the second-floor apartment that he shared with his family, out into the alley that was behind their building, and there was Sally in the trash can. So Maurice, being a big, brave kid, he opens the door and starts screaming out the window, "Dirty, stinky, smelly Sally, what are you doing in our trash can? Why don't you get in the thing?" And all of a sudden, he had this whole body chill. He pulled his head in out of the window, turned around, and realized his mama was standing right there, and that he knew she had heard every word he said. She looked at him. She actually looked up at the sky first and pointed like this, and poor Maurice, he didn't know whether she was looking for information or as he was about to die. Fortunately, she was looking for inspiration. She looked at him and said, "Maurice, don't you ever talk to anyone like that again, ever." And then gave him a list of chores that took him till bedtime to complete. Well, the next Saturday, in the tradition of the family, Bee had, where she would usually fix pancakes and sausage and fruit for her whole little brood. When Maurice got down to the kitchen that morning, he realized that there was another extra guest at the table. There was a woman who was dressed in one of his mom's Sunday dresses. She smelled lovely. Her hair had been washed and fixed. And Bee announced to Maurice, "Your job at breakfast this morning is to make sure that our guest is properly taken care of. Make sure that she's fed properly, that her coffee is warmed up and kept full. And then when you've done that, you can eat your breakfast." So everybody finishes breakfast, and the guest and Mrs. Nutt moved to the living room to have some conversation. She told Maurice, "Your job, like always, is to do the dishes." About the time he was finished, B walks back into the kitchen. And he stopped and turned around. She said, "Son, do you know who our guest was this morning? He was about to start the bad boy litany of dirty," and she lovingly put her finger up to his lips and said, "Our guest this morning was Jesus Christ." Maurice Nutt is a priest, and he maintains that that was the first moment he felt he was inspired to become a priest. Our guest this morning was Jesus Christ. Let's take a break. Back in 15 minutes. I'll play some music when you're coming back so that you'll know about when it's time to come back, okay? Okay.
Well, I do the youth group that she's a part of.
Thank you.
You're coming back, right? Oh, yeah. Yeah, because I know it's chilly out. Oh, is it?
Oh, way out.
Stuff to the car.
Looking at Miss Jane. Here we go. So we start at here. Oh, yeah, that's the number 2 they said. Wow, we get a little walking up here.
That's why I said, I'm here in Texas.
I love it. How are you, girl? Any more medical problems? Really? Did you not very well? Supposed to pick them all up very well. And I have, I heard this too. And me.
Still here.
Did you get the pizza or but I know we take them seriously. Yeah, that's well, wait, I can't probably. The end, I know the end is
And that's another reason. I can sneak around this way. Thank you.
Unfortunately, that's the loudest it will go. This is a friend of mine at his Lutheran church up in Dayton, Ohio. He played this as a prelude a couple weeks ago. And he had enhanced the video of the audio. He just can't get it any louder. So. Okay, who? Russ?
Yeah.
You do? You do?
I bought a bag.
The boss is up front.
Okay. She's right. Can I catch?
Oh, she's right here.
Oh, there's the boss. Hi, boss.
This is as loud as this thing goes. You have to carry it around. This piece of music was actually played as a prelude by one of my former executive coaching clients at his Lutheran church in Dayton, and he's asked me to work with his Bible study class using stuff from our Live Humbly Serve Gracious School. So I asked him if I could steal this. It's fine. You're welcome. Okay. I know there was one lady that said that she had to drive home. Okay. Welcome back. As we get started, we're going to make a transition using the Maurice Nutt story as kind of the focal point moving forward to what it means then to reach out and be Christ to others, to show or to be gracious and merciful to others. Another statement by our loving God himself, Jesus to Saint Faustina. I'm giving you 3 ways of exercising mercy towards your neighbor. First, by deed. Second, by word. The third, by prayer. Practicing these 3 are unquestionable proof of your love for me. Can that be any clearer? This isn't somebody surmising what Jesus said. This is actually what Jesus did say. You remember the tail end of the story that we just told before the break, right? I want you to keep that in mind as we move on from this slide. Like Jesus, we must be others-centered. Furthermore, our baptism requires that we be good stewards of the gifts that we've been given, because when we're baptized priest, prophet, and king, right? Priest, prophet, and king. Are you willing to cheerfully show love, mercy, and compassion to a perfect stranger who may in fact be dirty, smells bad, has a different skin color, religious tradition, or country of origin than your own? Isn't that what Jesus just told Faustina? You got to do that, right? But are we willing to do that? This is kind of a review, because I suspect you all know what agape is. It's the unconditional love of God for us. It is, in fact, the agape, the kind of love that Paul talks about in Corinthians 13, right? The unconditional version. It is the essence of mercy and compassion. And agape doesn't have eyes, ears, or nose. Unconditional. So hopefully the message about reaching out to people no matter where they are has landed now. Mercy is about serving others unconditionally. But serving unconditionally requires humility. That's getting down to the very roots. Humility requires unconditional love. So if you were building a small building, love would be first because that serves as the foundation. Humility is the building itself, and then service is the roof structure on the building. You might say, well, where's mercy? Mercy's the shingles on the roof. And we're not talking about 40-year zinc shingles. We're talking about slate shingles that last a lifetime. All of those pieces and parts fit together. The church encourages us, particularly during Lent, to concentrate on praying, fasting, and almsgiving. The truth of the matter is the church actually promotes that year-round. Let me go back and repeat what it really says, is during Lent, we should be praying more, we should be fasting more, and we should be giving more. Why would we do that? It's because this season of Lent is about preparing for the celebration of the risen Christ. Paul had just completed the most successful meeting of his career. He is so excited, the biggest deal he has ever completed. They've already signed the contract. They're leaving this skyscraper kind of building in Brooklyn to head back to the airport to fly home. He can't wait to tell his boss and his wife about the success that they had just had. He and his 3 colleagues. And they get outside the door, and all of a sudden a miracle kind of happened. There was a vacant cab literally on the other side of the street, and in New York, that never happens. So they're waving their arms, they're hollering, they're running like pell-mell across the sidewalk to catch this cab to get to the airport so they can go home. Somehow or another, as this group of men pass this fruit stand, this produce stand, somehow or another the stand got bumped. Actually, it got knocked. Fruit went everywhere. Meanwhile, Paul's 3 colleagues are already at the door of the cab hollering, "Come on, Paul, you're going to miss the plane." He says, "Go on. I'll catch up with you later." He turned around to go back and pick up all the produce that they had taken, or that they had knocked over. And when he got back to the stand, he realized that the lady running the stand was blind. And tears were just running down her face, quietly sobbing. And he says, "It's okay, it's okay." And in his good business suit, he gets down on the street, in the gutters, and on the sidewalks of New York City, with literally hundreds of people going by each direction, doing nothing. And Paul picks up every piece of produce, puts it back up on the stand after he gets everything up, and he kind of separated the stuff that got damaged when it fell. He rearranged it the way he thought it maybe should have looked, and then he pulled out his wallet, and he hands the woman some bills, and he says, "Ma'am, I think this should cover all the produce that was damaged." And with that, he turned to walk away along with the crowd of hundreds out there on the sidewalk. The woman calls to him and said, "Sir, are you Jesus?" He turned around and kind of smiled and said, "No, ma'am, I'm not Jesus." She said, "Well, the reason I'm asking is because when my stand got knocked and all the fruit, I could hear the fruit hitting the sidewalk, I prayed to Jesus that he would send someone to help me. And I thought that was you." When was the last time somebody confused you for Jesus? When was the last time somebody confused you for Jesus? We have learned since very early in our religious training about the spiritual and corporal works of mercy, right? When we exercise those works of mercy, we are in fact imitating Jesus, aren't we? I mean, these aren't just made up things, right? All right, so what are the corporal works of mercy? First of all, how many of them are there? That's it. Now, what are they? Feed the hungry, thirsty, clothe the naked, visit the sick.
Prisoners.
Oh, visit prisoners, right? Bury the dead. That's not in the list I have, but it's a good one. It should be, right? We need to write the authors of the catechism and tell them to add one. All right, here's the 7. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, visit the sick and imprisoned, bury the dead. My recollection is I didn't hear the shelter the homeless. Did someone say that? Yeah, that's kind of an issue, isn't it? What are the spiritual works of mercy? I'll bet you're not going to get these quite as easily. Admonish sinners, yes. Instruct the ignorant, yes. Counsel the...
Confused.
I am, so I'm ready. Okay, come on.
Comfort somebody.
Comfort the afflicted. The next couple are kind of hard. Not only to remember, but to do. All right, you ready? 7, admonish the sinner, instruct the ignorant, counsel the doubtful, comfort the sorrowful, bear wrongs patiently. Oh my gosh. And that goes for husbands and wives, you know. Forgive all injuries, pray for the living and the dead. Now, clearly, I'm not going to walk through all 14 of those. But I've picked a few that I would like to share with you with the hopes that maybe you'll have a slightly different take on what those particular works of mercy are. The first one, feed the hungry and give drink to the thirsty. That actually is kind of a little bit of understanding that one's a little bit easy, right? Do y'all have a food pantry here?
Yes.
Okay, but the parish is involved in making sure that food goes to food pantries, that sort of thing. I want to give you a few little tidbits about food in the United States that I hope will just shock the living daylights out of you. It certainly did me. Hunger in the United States is not about the shortage of food. It is about the prevalence of poverty. It's not at all about a shortage of food. Now, here are the startling pieces. 72 billion, that's a B, billion pounds of safe, edible food goes to waste every year in the United States. If you do the quick math, that's 160,000 tons of edible, safe food that is wasted every year. If you happen to drive a 4,000-pound car, that would be a parking lot filled with 180,000 of your car's worth of food. That much weight. If you happen to drive a Suburban, it's 120,000 Suburbans worth of food wasted in this country every year. Is that number not staggering? 25 to 40% of all food grown, processed, and transported will never, ever be consumed. So 1 out of 4 pounds to up to 2 out of 5 pounds of all food grown will never be consumed, even though it has been processed, packaged, whatever it is to get it to market. It will never, ever be consumed. And the last one staggers me the most of all. The single largest item that reaches landfills and incinerators are safe, edible food. In the whole business of trash collection, you may think it's cardboard boxes and all that kind of stuff. No, no, no. Food, edible, safe food is the single largest item that goes into sanitary landfills and incinerators. I find that just absolutely heartbreaking. You can do something. Concerning the water, I spent almost 40 years with the Water Research Agency of the federal government, so this is a little bit kind of a sentimental thing for me. First of all, there's generally sufficient safe, clean water almost everywhere, but it's not always enough everywhere all the time. That's what droughts are about, okay? Water conservation is everyone's business, and protecting water quality is also everyone's business. How many people, when they brush their teeth, leave the water running? Stop it! How many people, when they're cleaning their contact lenses, let the water run the whole time they're cleaning their lenses and get them in their eyes? I used to. Don't anymore. We can't afford to waste a single drop of clean water. I could talk an hour just on that topic. We're not going to do that tonight, though. But it's important to understand that in our country, while there is generally safe drinking water available everywhere, we're very fortunate as a country. I have done 3 mission trips to Honduras, and I tell you, there is very little safe drinking water available there. The friars that we worked with dug a very deep well in order to allow people to come fill up jugs to take fresh, safe water back to their homes. We take for granted a lot of what other people suffer through. The shortage of food thing, that's a U.S., the fact that it's not a scarcity of food, that's a U.S. thing. In other parts of the world, that is a major issue. There is a gross shortage of food in other parts of the world. In James 2, it says, if a brother or sister has nothing to wear and has no food for the day, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat well, but do not give them the necessities of the body, what good is it? This is not about a talking issue. This is about a doing issue. We can't just talk about helping people. We actually have to do it. What can you do just on the nutrition issue? Just think about that. And after you thought about it, go home and do it. I would like to point out that at the Last Supper, Jesus said, this is my body, this is my blood. And then he said, take and eat, take and drink. The primary reason why I chose those 2 works of mercy to talk about first is because, frankly, they relate to the Eucharist. Take and eat, take and drink. This is my body, this is my blood. There is no coincidence, I don't believe. Feeding the hungry and giving drink to the thirsty is holiness in action. Frankly, exercising all of the works of mercy are. The notion of clothing the naked and housing the homeless. I mentioned that I've been to Honduras a few times on mission trips. I will tell you, if it were not for donated clothes, the children, even the adults that I saw there, probably would have been naked. There were T-shirts in every language from all over the world. I mean, people that generously gave away that which they no longer needed was actually getting to people, and that's what people were wearing to stay clothed. Here's an issue that you may or not be aware of, and this is kind of typical of what you might see out on the street, at a street corner, at an intersection or whatever, and that's the fact that many believe that as many as 1 out of 4 men on the street right now in our country are actually former military veterans. I've done some further research on this, and the number, according to the 2020 census, suggests that number may actually be 40% of the men living homeless on the street are veterans. I don't know which one of those numbers is the most vigorous. They're both really tragic. But you all know it's not just homeless men. You've probably seen pictures just like the one I'm about to show you in real life. That's where single moms with babies out on the street. We've got to do better than we do now. I don't know what the answer is, but any kind of creative thought for how to fix issues like this just need to be acted on. Some things that you might want to consider. Do you have clothes that you no longer wear? Get rid of them. Give them to somebody that can wear them. How about shoes you no longer need? You know, somebody doesn't have shoes, they don't care if the shoes are used. They don't. What about extra blankets, coats, or sweaters? We're just coming out of winter, so it's maybe not quite as critical now, but it gets pretty cold around here too in the wintertime. There are people who might actually die because of the blanket that might not have been given out of your abundance that would have kept them warm. Amen, I say to you, whatever you did for the least one of these, my brothers, you did for me. How can I possibly help with sheltering the homeless? Are there programs in your area here where that's taken care of? St. Vincent de Paul? I mean, in any ministries? What is the ministry that the second collection was for tonight? Is it home missions? Was any of that for housing? The point is, some of these things are issues that we oftentimes just don't give enough thought to. And my purpose for putting them here in front of you is to simply getting you to thinking about how you might be able to help. Maybe it might be worth going together with 2 or 3 other families and putting somebody up in an extended stay hotel for a while when it's cold. I mean, you don't have to do it all by yourself. Nobody said you did. I mean, we know a woman in Atlanta who is a waitress at the restaurant where we often have dinner. This woman lives on the waitress's salary. She actually goes 125 miles away from Atlanta to help with people that are without good shelter. She buys their kids shoes. She has very little, but what she has, she gives in abundance. I'm not sure we can all say that. I would hope that during this Lent we might consider doing more of that. Does this date ring a bell with anybody? October 2nd, 2006. A man by the name of Charles Roberts IV approached an old order Amish school in Nickel Pines, Pennsylvania. He went in, he expelled the 2 adult women and all the boys in the room. He locked the door, tied up all 10 little girls that were aged 6 to 13, shot them all, killing 5 of them. That afternoon, one of the Amish grandfathers said to the younger people in the community, "We must not think evil of this man." One of the dads of a child who was murdered said he had a mother, a wife, and a soul, but he's now standing before a just God. He later went on to say, justice is now in God's hands. We only need to worry about living the gospel of peace and forgiveness. That community actually went to the home of the wife of the guy who did the murders, comforted them, bought them food, even started the Amish version of a GoFundMe page to raise money to help the family of the wife of the guy who had killed their kids. So, Amish forgiveness. Is it Christ-centered or is it insanity? In the immediate aftermath of the Nickel Mines event, people all over the world, when they heard of what happened, could not believe that the Amish people went out for just absolute, sheer, unmitigated vengeance. They actually thought the Amish reaction to the event was worse than the event itself. I ask you, the Amish forgiveness, was that insanity or was it Christ-centered? Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive him? As many as 7 times? By the way, if they used to go to daily mass, this was in Tuesday's gospel. How many times? 70 times? 77 times. Don't you suppose that Matthew meant, that Jesus meant, whenever, forgive, right? Whenever you see big numbers like that in the Bible, it usually means like always, right? Kind of like the 1,000th generation. It really kind of meant for eternity. 77 times. So, are you angry with someone? Are you holding a grudge? Have you injured someone by something you said, did, or didn't do? Who do you need to forgive? There's a wonderful Lenten exercise that says if you have an issue with any of these 4 questions that I put up here, Lent is the perfect time to get those issues resolved. Praying for the living and the dead. How many times have you been asked to pray for somebody's special intention? Lots, right? How many times have you asked others to pray for your special intentions? A lot, right? What are the reasons? There could be a whole boatload of them. I've just put up 10. But there's probably 500,000. Pray for the living and the dead. That's what being part of the communion of saints is about, right? If we have a need, we need to ask people to help us. That gives them the opportunity to pray for us. We give them the opportunity to do the giving, right? How can we do that? There's a lot of ways. One of my favorite ways in recent time, maybe over the last year and a half, probably is praying the Divine Mercy Chaplain. And maybe it's because I was writing on a book about scandalous mercy that one seemed like the right thing to do. But it's a remarkably powerful prayer. It is the prayer that Christ asked of St. Faustina to spread. There's a wide range of needs out there. We need to be praying for the needs of others. There is a nexus of praying for the living and the dead that I wanted to include here because the whole notion of mercy is so hugely wrapped up in it. And that has to do with abortions. Since Roe v. Wade was enacted, or was kind of made law of the land, although it's really not a law, since that was done in 1973 until 2020, there have been 60 million babies that we know of that have been aborted. 60 million. Do you know what the population of the United States is? About 330, right? So roughly 1 out of 5 people that currently live in our country has been wiped out and never given the chance to breathe. Kind of wanted to do a little bit of getting a sense of all of this. The 2020 population figures for Florida, California is just slightly less than 40 million people. Florida is slightly over 20 million people. Do you see any coincidence about those numbers right there? Since Roe v. Wade was enacted, we have basically wiped out the entire population of California and Florida, 2 of the most populous states in the country, by aborting babies. Is that not staggering? When you pray for the elimination of abortions, we're praying for both the living and the dead. Currently, according to the most recent research data, 59% of all adults in the United States believe that abortion should be legalized. 59%. And it would be easy to say, well, that's them. You know, we're devout Christians. You know what the numbers are for Catholics? 56% believe that abortion should be legal. Guess what? 56 and 56 and 60, those numbers are essentially the same. We have a lot to pray for. There is no greater mercy than saving the life of a preborn child. I heard a presentation recently by a guy who's on the medical staff at Florida State University Medical School, and he doesn't call them unborn children, he calls them preborn children. This is a doctor that actually operates on babies before they're born. He says, they're patients. He said, they're just preborn. He saves babies by operating them, changing a heart valve in a baby in the mother's body. Mother Teresa said, you know, if we kill our young, what is left for us? Please think about this and pray about this as much as you can. And I think I heard tonight that your day is April such and such 8th for being down on the sidewalk at the abortion clinic here in Columbia. Please go. Pray for the living and the dead. I think there's another part of this work of mercy that I'd like to call to your attention. And maybe it's because I had the experience very recently, about 3 years ago, of praying with a dear friend who was dying. So this is about praying with the dying. The man who I dedicated the new book to, the Ridiculous Grace book, was one of the deacons at our parish. And when asked what I could do besides just praying for him, I said, you know, we're doing that anyway. I said, what else can I do? He said, if you've got the time, how about coming out and praying the Liturgy of the Hours morning prayers with me? So about every second day from that point on until he died, I had the distinct honor of praying with him as he was dying. Possibly one of the most prayerful, meaningful prayer experiences I've ever had. Don't be afraid to pray with those who are actively dying. There is no greater gift of mercy that you can provide. In my first book, I entitled the last chapter, The Power of Leading with Aggressive Humility. Kind of a catchy title. My second book was a little bit different, but it was the Power of Living with Aggressive Humility. So I was trying to figure out something that might work well in that genre for the new book. And so I decided to get something that might have some mental remembering things. You know, people that are in the marketing business, that are into branding and all of that kind of thing, they like slogans. Well, I'm not talking about a slogan, but in the marketing business world, it is. You remember back in 1962, Avis was running second of all the major rental car companies, right? Do you remember what their motto came out to be? They were number 2 in there, but do you remember what they decided their marketing strategy was going to include? It was a slogan. Come on, you know it. They actually Well, actually, you're right. We try harder. That's why you should rent your car from us. We try harder. Believe it or not, they actually used that slogan for 50 years. From 1962 to 2012. In 2012, the brilliant executives at Avis Rent-A-Car decided, you know, this is getting old and stale. So they hired some marketing geniuses and probably had 12 jillion focus groups to develop a new slogan to get people to understand why they should rent from Avis. I bet you don't know what the new slogan is, do you? I sure didn't know. And when I saw it, I'm thinking, what in the name of common sense were they thinking? You ready? It's your space. What? Are you kidding me? What does that even mean? It went from we try harder to it's my space. Oh my goodness. Well, hopefully, the thought that I have at the end of this book is a slightly better challenge and hopefully a little catchier than it's my space. Because what I'm trying to do is convince you that you should be saying on a regular basis, Lord, help me learn to be third. Do you all know who Father Larry Richards is? He's pastor of St. Joseph's Church in Erie, Pennsylvania, and a very well-known mission and retreat guy. He's kind of awesome. I actually stole this idea from Larry Richards. I actually asked his permission, so I guess it's really not stealing. And he said, absolutely, go for it. Lord, help me learn to be third. It's all taken ultimately from 2 Philippians. Have among yourselves the same attitude that is also yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God something to be grasped. He emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, coming into human likeness and found in human appearance. He humbled himself. Becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross. All right. I'm most interested in those two phrases right there because I heard this given at a parish mission at our parish a number of years ago. And as many times as I had read Philippians 2, 5 through 8, it never occurred to me until I heard those two phrases read out loud, immediately one after the other, that it clicked. I'm an engineer by education, and so math and that sort of thing is kind of my thing. You may have even heard me slip and say the word equation earlier tonight when I didn't mean to. In this case, I do mean equation. Because when I heard he emptied himself and he humbled himself, it occurred to me that that was exactly like an equation written just like this. But you remember your basic math, that when you have like things on either side of an equal sign, you can scratch those off, right? And so if you take Jesus off and himself off of both sides, you're left with emptied equals humbled. Or just simply, to be humble is to empty ourselves. Go back to what is the short prayer I want you to say? Lord, help me learn to be third. Can I have myself in the forefront of my thinking if I'm asking to be third? I don't think so. Maximilian Kolbe, one of our modern day saints, says that humility is the foundation of all virtue. When it is missing, basically all the others disappear. So the whole notion of Lord, help me learn to be third is based on the notion of humility. I used the term back earlier about aggressive humility. I'll tell you how that all came about. Aggressive means militant. Militant means passionate dedication to a cause. Our humility, according to Scott Hahn, and I love this definition, he says loving service of others, and true love is the agape or the unconditional form of love. Therefore, aggressive humility is the passionate, unconditional loving service of others. That's kind of a mouthful, but it actually leads to, all right, so how does this help me live my life being third? So I'm going to conclude with just a few ideas on how you might want to do that. There's a whole lot more of them in the book, but I just want to pick a few of them. First of all, is don't think less of yourself, but think of yourself less. Choose to put yourself third, behind God first, others second, me third. Be kind to everyone. It costs nothing. What possible justification could there be for not being kind? If you're really focused on the notion of putting yourself in third place, I don't think you can come up with a valid reason for not being kind. Treat everyone with dignity and respect without looking for something in return. That's what the whole agape love thing is about, is treating people with dignity and respect regardless of what they say or do. Right? Keep the needs of others in the forefront of your thinking. Their thoughts, needs, desires, and aspirations are just as important, maybe even more important than yours. Stop putting yourself in the center of the universe. Know the person that empties the trash can and cleans the restrooms at your office. Know their name. Treat them just as though you would treat your best friend. It's remarkable what happens when you do that. Share your time, talent, and treasure generously. Give unconditionally without looking for a return. We talked earlier about the fact that stewardship is our responsibility to share the gifts that we have been given. Look for the best in everybody. Try to find Christ's face in each person, including that neighbor who may be a pain in your neck. No matter who you're with, be 100% present to them. The version of this talk that I'm going to give over at Cardinal Newman's school on Monday, what I put down instead of the yellow right there is, put down your cell phone. Of course, I guess I could say that here too. Put down your cell phone. Guilty as charged. Choosing to think of others instead of yourself is not as simple as it sounds. You really have to listen. You have to concentrate. And you have to stop putting yourself ahead of them. Be open to the ideas of others. It is remarkable how much you can learn when you listen. Concentrate on the small stuff. Y'all know who Matthew Kelly is, right? In a recent book, and I don't remember which one it is, he talked about the fact that saints didn't really live holy lives. He said what they did was lead lives that were filled with an almost continuous stream of holy moments. And he describes a holy moment as one of those times when you believe God is actually asking you and urging you to do something, and you commit and do it. You don't look for reasons not to do it. So concentrate on the small stuff. Create those streams of holy moments. Every single one of us can do it. It may be inconvenient, but we can always do it. Apologize. Be the first to apologize and do so sincerely. If you've got a disagreement with somebody, even if you think you're only 1/10 of 1% at fault, apologize. Do you know how much 1/10 of 1% is? 1 chance in 1,000. Are we that sure of our position that we think it's less than one chance in 1,000 that we might have had something to do with the disagreement? Probably not. Apologize sincerely. Don't hold grudges. There's absolutely nothing to be gained by holding a grudge. You know, you've heard the Hatfields and McCoys. You've heard about the different groups in the Middle East. I mean, it's crazy. There is no value in holding a grudge. Praise others selflessly and accept feedback courageously and graciously. Be actually genuinely happy for others when they succeed. This is really hard for many people. If all you can see is the image that's typically looking back at you when you're in front of a mirror, it's sometimes really hard to be happy for others when they succeed, because somehow or another you might be living in a zero-sum world where if they get something, I get less. Put that kind of thinking away. That doesn't put you in third position at all. Their success is theirs, and we should be not threatened by it in any way. Celebrate them enthusiastically. It is remarkable how releasing that can be. Give God credit for your talents, successes, and gifts. Fact of the matter is, they're all from Him anyway. So just be truthful. Another step towards, Lord, help me learn to be third. Things go right, share the credit. When they go wrong, accept the responsibility. That's tough. It's tough for some of us as well. I would suggest to you that praying the rosary daily is a wonderful way to nourish your relationship with the Blessed Mother, and she will, in fact, help you on your journey to becoming number 3. And you must be disciplined, whether it's as a parent or as a supervisor in a business situation. Be hard on the action, soft on the person. Give away every ounce of wisdom you have. Everything that you have has been given to you anyway. Do you all know who Father Richard Rohr is? He talks about the 2 halves of life. First half is about all the things that we take in. But he talks about in the second half of life is all about giving everything away. When I was actively doing executive coaching work, I was oftentimes working with senior people who were near the end of their careers, and that is one of the most important lessons that I felt that I could share with them, is that they give away every ounce of intelligence that they had. Once they left, it wasn't going to do them any good anyway. So why not gift the people in the organization you're leaving with everything that you can possibly give? It was all given to you anyway. So just be honest about it. Being third means being passionately dedicated to the unconditional loving service of others. Lord, help me learn to be third. What does it mean? Let's go back. And this is a case where I know I'm actually going to tell the story twice, as opposed to poor Rachel, who didn't know that she was telling the same story twice. We're going to go back to what I said very early on about God's love for us. The Father's love is so remarkable and so abundant that He pours out to His Son that it cannot be contained. And so it flows from the Son to us. And the amount that comes from Jesus to us is so abundant that we can't contain it either. And so it then has to be poured out on others. I would encourage you, starting right now, try to allow yourself, try to make yourself become an island of mercy in a sea of indifference. What does that mean? Remember the story I told you about Paul, the businessman, picking up the fruit off the street? Paul was the island of mercy in that story. The hundreds of people walking by, totally oblivious to what was going on and not being aware of the need to help. That's the sea of indifference. Let's be like Paul's, not the hundreds that walk by that are totally indifferent. So I would ask the question, how will you choose to use God's gift of ridiculous grace and scandalous mercy to become islands of mercy in a huge and ever-growing sea of indifference? I wish you all the joy of the risen Christ as you celebrate Easter this year. Thank you. Be happy to take any questions if you have. Any questions? Comment. Yes, ma'am.
Driving on Two Notch Road, which is the main thoroughfare.
Yep, I know it. I used to work on it.
Okay, in two
Years ago.
directions, going in both directions. There's huge
Mhm.
of a woman, different women. And
Bless
it
you.
says, put yourself first.
Yep.
It breaks my heart.
Yeah, it does. Remember, if you could climb up there on a ladder, just spray paint. Lord, help me learn to be third.
That'd be a good
Yeah, there you go. There's one on 285 in Atlanta that I absolutely despise. Let us help you undo the I do. Dear Heb, let us help you undo the I do. Seriously.
Was it Bill Green?
These accidents, yeah.
So it's been a pleasure being here with you. We do have some copies of, yes, sir.
I wonder if I can hear from others, where's a group or a way to get help of clothing or anything used by the people?
Is there anything going on in your community that you know about? Right, Russ?
There's down at St. Peter's, they have on the fourth Saturday, a homeless luncheon, and they leave clothes there. There's women's shelters, 3 different women's shelters around that need clothes. Transitions need clothes.
Okay.
Gospel needs clothes.
Okay. The point is, there's a bunch of things. Maybe there needs to be some conversation within the parish to see if that can help facilitate some of that. Because there's probably a lot of people that would be happy to donate. That's what I'm hearing anyway. Did I hear another question over here? Yes, Karen.
I just wanted to share a way of remembering that putting yourself third is joy.
Yep.
For joy, Jesus, others, yourself.
Yep.